The incredible thing about New Zealand was it didn't have mammals. The top predators, the great hunters, were the birds.
And then, less than 2,000 years ago, humans arrived, and overnight, the rules changed.
Our native species are moving closer to that brink of extinction.
We need to make some really big, bold decisions.
By 2050, every single part of New Zealand will be completely free of rats, stoats and possums.
It is a plan so audacious in scope it's been called New Zealand's Apollo project.
Predator-free, all of New Zealand in 34 years. Is that achievable?
I believe it is.
While many will question whether the 2050 goal is realistic, the government insists it can be done and says it's fenced sanctuaries like this one here in Wellington at Zealandia that prove it is possible to be completely predator-free.
Just under 30 years ago, a biodiversity assessment was done of Wellington, and there were reckoned to be around about 30 tui in the whole of Wellington. There were reckoned to be around about 2 or 3 pairs of kererū in the whole of Wellington. They're all over the place now. What this place has enabled is that idea of the proof of concept. Rather than me talking to you conceptually about, well, imagine what we could achieve if we did this, I can simply bring you here and say, look, this is what it feels like. Listen to it. Come and have a look. Much more than that, I think the role of Zealandia and the role of other fenced sanctuaries and initiatives like this is to enable that to spill out into the places where we live. The great thing about the birds is that they're not bothered by the fence.
Still pinch myself every time I hear those sounds. That's a tieki saddleback. So, you know, we're in George Denton Park, kids' playground, surrounded by houses, and that's a bird that in the 60s was on one island off Northland. So they were reintroduced to Zealandia, I think 2003 or 4. Started coming over the fence 5 or 6 years later, and now we've got tieki breeding in Pole Hill, which is, 5 minutes from the top of Willis Street in Wellington. I'm one of the Pole Hill protectors. It's a group of kids, grannies, mountain bikers, runners, mountain biking grannies, community members who are looking after a 70-hectare chunk of their backyard. People come here to go mountain biking because it's, literally the only place in the world you can go mountain biking with tieki or saddleback. Some people joke there's a special move, which is the kaka dodge, as they hoon down the track. So, yeah, it's pretty neat.
Oh, trap sprung.
When we started, it was half a dozen of us. Now we've got a group of nearly 900 people on the Facebook group. There's about 60 trappers on 7 lines. It's pushed out into the surrounding suburbs. So we've got predator-free Brooklyn, Wild Aro, Conservation Highbury, and they're all starting to think, well, what can we do to help in our backyards to support what's going on in the reserves? So we've kind of got this halo effect spreading out.
For the government to commit to predator-free, it has to have become mainstream. It was really a reflection of the change in society that had happened, where conservation shifted from this purvey of the greenies out in the back to actually just being something that everyone values.
I came into this job in 2013, and one of the first things I could see in this job was this movement. Places like Zealandia had really helped create a gravitas that we need to think how we do this without fences.
We'll take the reach and leadership of the government, the funding of philanthropists, and the energy of local communities and iwi.
Got to put a far flag on the hill for these sorts of things. It's no good saying we're going to go and try and get rid of most of them, or we're going to go and try and get rid of them from most places. That doesn't inspire in the way that let's get them out of the country does.
Predator Free 2050, there was global attention and acclaim. Everyone knows how hard it is to get rid of invasive species, and so people went, wow.
We are pulling every single lever that is available to us as a government. We wouldn't have committed to the objective of becoming predator-free by 2050 if we didn't think it could be achieved.
The government will from next year invest $28 million into a company called Predator Free New Zealand. For every $2 a private company or council commits to pest control, Predator Free New Zealand will contribute $1.
So Predator Free 2050 is a government-owned for-purpose business. It's our job to enable and support community groups, iwi, regional councils and councils to come together on large landscape-scale projects to remove predators. We've got 10 already underway, and they're all over the country.
Most certainly we'll start with the more easily defendable sites. We'll do more work on islands, we'll work on peninsulas, we'll work where there's an active, engaged community that want to achieve predator-free eradication in their backyard, and we can spread out from there.
This is such a big project. Therefore, this is absolutely something the government could not do on its own. We've got to be very creative about how we organise ourselves and fund ourselves. It's very exciting to see others come along, like the Next Foundation and other philanthropic sources, so we can harness the knowledge, the creativity, the money, the skills of a very wide range of people and organisations.
The department's role in Predator Free, if you like, is the conductor of the orchestra. So we've got communities, we've got philanthropy, we've got commercial partners, we've got hundreds of people every weekend out there doing it. We're trying to make all those parties successful.
When you start to see the level of activity and the intensity of activity and what's being achieved all over the country, we're all in our own little small way contributing to the Predator Free 2050. And it's like we all think we've got a huge struggle ahead of us. But when you put all that energy together, I think we've got a chance of achieving it. I really do.
Don't kid yourself that it's going to be easy. We're talking eradication, we're not talking control or suppression. That jump is massive, in my view, massive.
Hi, Nina. This is quite a common hangout site for the care. They get attracted by the people and the cars and all the things, and quite often young ones come and fly in and have a nosy around the place and mess with all the cars and things. I guess people know care as being these pesky little visitors at ski fields that steal your food or pick your rope out of your mountaineering backpack But there's so much more to them than that, and when you get to come into a place like this and look at wildcare, they're just majestic and charismatic, but they're equally as vulnerable as lots of our other native bird species. This bird that's just come in here is got bands on white 5 on brown, and goes by the name of Clarence. And you know, as you can see, people love taking photos and, you know, interacting with these birds. And so we set up this citizen science program called the Kea Sightings Database. And so people can look out for all the kea, add their band details into the database and look up, you know, a bit about that particular bird.
The value of the citizen science project with the sightings of these birds is that it contributes to getting an overall idea of what's happening with the population. All of the work that we've been doing over the years and other researchers and Department of Conservation, we're finding that they're still in decline. The main concerns that we've got is predation of kea, birds sitting on nests, chicks on nests, as well as those adults that are foraging. They're constantly being challenged and they're constantly under threat.
Yeah. The birds are nice and quiet, not too excited. Oh, here we go. The male sitting up there, eh? Check those traps, change the batteries and cards.
So back in 2016, I did the rat monitoring, stoat monitoring lines not far from here. And here's these 2 juvenile keas sitting on a log, and they see me and they get really excited and they start bouncing up and down. So that's how we knew that there was a nest around here somewhere. I think the following year was when Alec came across the actual nest itself.
We monitored the kea nest with cameras, and we had 2 chicks for maybe 2 months that first season. Then we lost one that was like 3/4 grown and mostly covered in down still. And then the remaining chick left the nest cavity. He stayed in the vicinity and he fledged, and we saw him a number of times afterwards. So the following season, there were at least 3 nesting attempts with eggs being laid. We saw stoats going into the nest, wekas, possums. Nothing was fledged from the nest. The kea doesn't try and defend anything. They'd sit back. They'd sit back and watch a possum or a stoat come in and take their chicks, and they would just sit in the back of the nest cavity and watch.
The keas very stoically go, oh well, and have another shot, which just amazes me, you know. 3 times in a row that year, and you sort of think, oh well, if you're going to have another go, we'll carry on and see what else we can do.
The beauty of these nest sites is a good site can be there for perhaps hundreds of years. That, you know, they're passed on from generation to generation, and if you can protect that site, it's well worth it.
Yeah, I think we need something here. I got rung up by Alec last winter, and he was short-handed. First day we got up here, we spent clearing the boundary, so we had bush saws and we carefully cut our way around the edge. And then Alec found some young guys who carried the netting up, which was a great relief to me because it must have been jolly heavy. The second time we came up, we started putting up the wire netting.
We have a floppy top so that they can't climb up and climb over, and a skirt on the bottom so that any animal coming in here is going to butt up against this. It's not 100%, we know that, but it'll do most of it. Where we're at right at this stage is that we have the hen sitting with young chicks, and we're very hopeful we'll get those chicks through to fledging. Time will prove whether or not it works.
First day of a big long tour yet. We're going to be going out sampling with the helicopter for the next month and a half. We're going to do the whole country. So there's, yeah, it's quite a mission and quite a lot of work to do.
Lots of trees in New Zealand forests, like the beech trees and things like rimu and kakatea, don't produce the same amount of seed every year. Most years they produce no seed at all, and then every third or fourth year they seem to all come to an agreement to flower and seed at the same time. So a mast is when the trees all go off together and flower and seed all at once. In the olden days, that was a bonanza for the birds, because there's lots of birds that eat the seeds of remus and kakateas and beeches, so things like parakeets, kakas and keas, all into this beech seed and rimu seed. But since we've introduced rats and mice to New Zealand, they're fantastic years for rats and mice. So a mast changed from being a great thing to being a bit of a disaster.
When you land up on the tops, you can see all the seed heads just moving in the wind. You can barely even see the body of the tussock when you're out there. It's just enormous amounts of seed. That is all food for rats and mice indeed.
Number 3 here. That's it. You can see the third pigtail there in the grass. And we'll go perpendicular to the right. So I'm just measuring the base of the tussock. So you can see there's sort of one distinct clump, and each of one of those has the potential to produce a flower or an inflorescence. So that's what we want to get a sense of, is how many of all the tillers, how many are actually flowering this year.
So when you get this mast seeding event, it feeds up the ecosystem, feeds the invertebrates. This goes through and feeds the rats, which explode in numbers, and then they go on themselves to feed the stoats. The long-term consequences of that is when the food resource disappears, all of those predators have to switch onto another food resource, usually the birds that remain.
During a big beech mast, most of the nests, probably 80% of them get preyed upon, and about half of the females also get killed on the nest. So yeah, so it's really knife edge. Nesting is almost impossible, and survival is, you know, you're tossing a coin to know whether you're going to make it through the spring and summer because of the high numbers of predators.
So this year for rimu, there is unprecedented number of fruit on the trees. For tussock, we see a huge amount of seed everywhere in the alpine zone, and we found that there is a huge amount of beech seed almost everywhere we went. This is by far the biggest mast I've seen.
You can look back over the last 40 years of climate predictions, and this is the most widespread mast we've had since we've been able to measure this stuff.
a bumper crop of autumn seeds has fueled a rat plague, but
exploding rat populations across New Zealand have conservationists worried. And
Conservationists are calling on the Department of Conservation to ramp up its response to what's being called a megamast.
There are boggling challenges to a notion like predator-free New Zealand. To get the easy stuff out of the way, I mean, it's not remotely achievable at the moment. It's a problem at scale, I think, is the issue. You know, if you consider the notion of a predator-free New Zealand, it's doing this cost-effectively on tens of thousands of hectares. That's the problem.
Morning.
Hey, how you going?
Good, how are you doing?
Good, it's a bit chilly.
Oh, yeah.
I'm Al Bramley. I lead the team at Zero Invasive Predators. We call ourselves ZIP for short, but our job is around helping to find the tools and techniques to enable predator-free New Zealand. Everything here seems like it's kind of in the bottom of the valley. So there are three main challenges. The first one is, how do you remove the predators from the landscape? The second one is, how do you defend it so that you don't have constant reinvasion? And the third one is, you will get reinvasion, so how do you detect them quickly and remove them before they establish a population? So what we've decided to do in the Perth and South Westland is attempt to do that at a large scale, but not only remove those animals, attempt to hold it in perpetuity. What we've learnt in the last couple of years is that rivers are really important to help us defend those landscapes. For possums and for ship rats, there's a real reluctance to cross large rivers in order to reinvade an area. It's because it's dangerous. But if we reinforce those rivers, then I think they'll act as the lines we can temporarily hold until we move past and move on to the next piece of land.
Perth Valley is one of our Pathfinder projects. You know, if we want to meet this goal to be predator-free by 2050, we're going to need to try new things, and the Perth Valley is experimenting with things which we hope, if they are successful, we can use elsewhere, and it will get us to our goal faster.
We are running a project at the moment where we're looking at stoat detection and how good our network is at detecting invading stoats. No block will be 100% free of stoats forever. No barrier is 100% proof. And obviously we're going to get reinvasion. So what we're trying to work out is how long it takes for us to pick up a stoat once it enters our block. The plan is to release up to 10 radio-collared stoats into the block. Just put the start pipe for the halothane, which is our anaesthetic of choice today. Make sure our stoat's out before we get our hands on it. And so you've already heard the stoats starting to chill out a wee bit. Get a good grip on them by the shoulders so we don't hurt them. They're very fragile. And so this is a decent sized adult male. So the first thing we're going to do is just size up the collar, and then Jenny will test that just with the pipe, just to make sure we can still get under there. That looks good. Nice and tight. And to do some stoat hairdressing. The next stage is to mark this animal using a hair dye. So in the field we're using cameras to detect these individuals that we're dropping off into our blocks. So we want to be able to tell each individual apart on camera. That's better. Come there. Nice. We've transported plenty of animals now by boat and helicopter and plane, so yeah, we're pretty confident that once we've got them to this stage, they'll be into the field, no problem. And the stoat's an amazing animal. It's viciously intelligent. You know, they're really good climbers, really good swimmers. They can go into burrows, and they're just efficient killing machines, really. where they come from in Europe and where they're native to, they have to hibernate over winter. So they've got this behaviour where they'll stash food, kill stash, and then come back to it in the winter. But of course the climate's different here, so they don't need to hibernate over winter. So they're just constantly killing and stashing food. So that combined with the fact that they just cover such a huge distance means that any time a stoat spends in the block, they can do real damage. All those characteristics lead to it being public enemy #1, as far as I'm concerned.
They have an adaptation which they brought with them from the Northern Hemisphere, that the young females in the nest pass puberty as unweaned nestlings, even blind nestlings. And the adult female, when she allows an adult male into her nest, she will mate with him, and then he will mate with all the infant females. When they leave the nest, they are already pregnant. That means that any female is, as it were, a time bomb. She has a whole new population within her.
They line their dens with the feathers or fur of the prey they eat. We pulled out 3 2-litre ice cream containers filled with feathers from just one den that this female stoat had been using for a few days. And it was full of feathers from mohua, kaka, parakeet. They were all native birds.
The last process before we release this guy is just to turn his TX collar on. And if I turn that on now, you'll be able to hear the radio static. And there's no beeping at the moment because we haven't turned his collar on, but once we turn his collar on, we'll be able to pick up a tone. There we go. In a couple of days' time, we'll fly the Sky Ranger plane over top, and all of these collars on all of our animals will let us know where they are. The Perth Valley project, it's just so massive and there's so many different components to it. It's not hard to see it and flowing into other regions up and down the coast where we've got these huge rivers and these big mountain ranges that just makes it perfect for replicating in the future. So yeah, I think this is a really key site that we're going to learn a lot from and be able to take a lot forward.
Okay.
I've got the torch.
There's no sound.
No sound.
It doesn't augur well.
One chick.
One chick.
The chick's looking good, but only one chick. Couldn't see hide nor hair of the other chick. So we'll have a look at the SD card and see if we can see the other chick, but I suspect we won't find it. I don't think so though, I was just being hopeful. Look, if we raised a chick, that would be a victory.
The cob nest gives us a really good example of just how difficult it is for these birds to be able to produce and regularly produce young. And it reflects what's happening at other sites as well. Getting fledglings away from nests is a massive challenge for the species.
What we'd really like to do is to manage everywhere where there's a problem, but we don't have the resources to do that, so we've got to pick and choose. And so typically we focus on areas where we get a coincidence of rare and vulnerable things and a high abundance of stoats, rats and seed.
So every year we have a meeting to decide on priority sites for pest control, particularly using Test 1080 for the next financial year. So this is actually, it's looking out not next year, it's the year beyond.
We've got a bit of a haggling match to have because we've got to trade off what we put into monitoring versus what we put into control. So yeah, it's well worth kicking that one around.
Basically what we're trying to do is hang on to as many of our threatened wildlife populations as possible. So it's driven by the threat level that each species is facing. It's difficult. There aren't enough resources to go around to protect everything everywhere. Essentially what we're doing is triage.
62 grams.
We are in a really big race against time at the moment. We know that our native species are at crisis point and they're being heavily wiped out by these pest species. So you've got to make a decision and say, do we use something that's good but not perfect, or do we just let those things go extinct?
.1080's the single most important tool in the toolkit that we've got in this point in time. It's the only safe and reliable way of controlling rodents and mustelids and possums over very large areas of remote country.
1080 is an essential tool, has been an essential tool for keeping a number of our species away from that brink of extinction.
This general discomfort about spreading a toxin out of a helicopter, I don't think it feels right to anybody to do that. But I also know that some of the key people involved are absolutely passionate about their birds and the environment, and they truly believe that this is the way to maintain that resilience in the population so we don't get more extinctions.
We're doing pest control, but we're in a suppression mode, which means we have to go back again and again and again. And we've just scaled up bigger than ever before, and we're still only covering less than 10% of the whole country.
The problem with the way we do pest control now is that if you don't get to zero, then you've got to keep doing it forever. Apart from that costing a lot of money and a lot of people's time, you also don't get to a higher state of biodiversity in terms of, rebound of the ecosystem.
There's been a lot of work in the past on suppression. What makes us different and the projects we work on different is the idea that we are trying to completely remove the target predator species.
So in remote, rugged, forested landscapes, in order to remove, we're going to have to use aerial tools. So right now, we're experimenting with a prescription of aerial 1080 that will enable us to remove every last rat, stoat and possum from those landscapes. The prescription isn't a lot different from what we do now, but we just have to do it firstly more precisely, so we have to be absolutely sure that we don't leave any gaps.
Every time a chopper goes out, we record the time that it leaves and also how much bait it's carrying with it when it leaves. And when they come back, we total up how many hectares they've covered and how many hectares they should have covered if they were sowing at a rate of 2 kgs per hectare.
These here are from their flight lines. We buffer them out based on the swath width that the bucket spreads, and then that gives us exactly where the bait's been spread out.
The second thing is pre-feeding the site twice. So that's about making sure that the animals that are a little bit shy or a little bit cautious have opportunity to gradually get used to the bait, so when we put the toxic version down, they don't hesitate and they consume it.
There's a lot of kea in this block here. The challenge is that sometimes a small percentage of them eat bait. So to make sure we understand what actually does happen here and whether we've got the right formula for fixing the kea problem, what we're doing is we're radio tagging about 30 kea in this valley, and we're watching them through this operation. But we're also monitoring really tightly what happens to the stoats, rats and possums.
There's one possum, about 8 stoats, a bunch of kea and a bunch of tar, which we're going to find out whether they're in or out of the block, basically, where the operation's taking place today.
We still don't really know how to cope with stoats at this sort of scale. They'll be monitored to see whether we can kill them with the 1080 They don't eat the 1080 directly, but they do eat poisoned rats. So we can kill the stoats reliably, we think, through feeding the toxin to the rats. I'm driven by a challenge, and this is a very cool challenge. If we get this formula right here, then we're going to have bird abundance in this valley, and as we expand the program, we'll have bird abundance everywhere.
Kia ora, ko Ngāti Tūwhare tōrau ko Ngāti Raukawa ki te tonga oku iwi, ko Jan Hania tōku ingoa. My name is Jan Hania. I work as the Environmental Director for the Next Foundation. So my role in the Taranaki Maunga project is as Project Director. So I worked hard in the early years with Taranaki Regional Council, Department of Conservation. So we sat down with them and worked out a plan to transform the mountain and improve its ecological vitality with the people of Taranaki and the iwi of Taranaki. And it's very much integrated with Māori worldview, Māori values. We have to bring iwi to the table first, from the board table through to working on the ground, because not only are we restoring the ecology, we're looking to restore people and communities in that process.
Right from the start, we've sought to ensure that our maunga is seen as a person, as a koroheke. We are intimately connected through whakapapa. We're intimately connected through our connection to place, and so that's why we've sought to place him at the centre of the things that we do here.
We've got essentially two operations happening here, Kaitaki being one and Puakai and Taranaki being the second. That operation and that model is about holding the line until we've got tools and have learned how to get towards eradication. So that's ultimately what this second part of the operation is about learning to shift that dial towards eradication. Kaitaki, we think we've got a model picking up from the learnings of Zip and Landcare that we can have a fair attempt at completely removing possums from this landscape here.
So as the Predator-Free 2050 company begins to invest in places around New Zealand, we're increasingly getting alongside those teams and trying to help them unpick their problems, their context, and gain the benefit of our short experience.
We've got a big area of land behind us on the Kaitaki ranges that would be a perfect possum-free zone, but you know, with the potential for high possum pressure from other areas, it's really important to have a solid barrier behind it.
So the barrier is made up of these four main lines. The lines are 100 metres apart and they have raised leg hold traps spaced at every 10 metres.
Into the setup goes the Zip leg hold motor driver unit, and this is activated with a magnet switch. So we can turn the device on over this side. Every day they report down the line back to a SAT box. The SAT box knows which traps are locked out, which traps are sprung, and that sends a message up to an Iridium satellite. So when we're sitting at home looking at the web server, we know which of our traps we need to come and service each day.
Perfect.
Anything on the SAT box can be done using the Bluetooth terminal on a cell phone.
There's no way we'd look at leg hold trapping on this scale without the remote reporting. Once we get down to really low possum numbers, we might be seeing 1 or 2 traps that we're going to have to check a day, as opposed to 1,500 that we've got out there. So it's a massive labour saving, and it's the game changer in making this kind of barrier possible.
50 or more schools have been involved in the project in some way or form, and they are now contributing to the wellness of this mountain through their work efforts. And that opportunity now is growing as more people are recognising the value of not only doing the rehabilitation work, but doing it for a purpose and a reason in your place with your maunga, and that's all bigger than yourself.
What you guys are doing right now is exactly what we're doing. So you're trialling the baits, you're trialling different colours and patterns and shapes and things. So keep working on that, because one day you might come up with the ultimate trap that brings us predator-free in 2050.
Yeah, so that's really good. You're doing a great job.
What's so terrible about them eating all our native birds? What's bad about that?
They're getting lower and lower in population.
Yeah, because we probably want to keep them around, don't we? What's so good about keeping them around?
So,
because they were part of New Zealand and we want to keep them part of New Zealand.
All right, next up.
I genuinely think about my boy Levi and what New Zealand might be like for him in the absence of kiwi and kaka or other birds in his community, and it's a strange thought, really.
It's not just about eradicating pests and predators. That's the first task, the first target. It's all about bringing back our native birds, letting our forests regenerate. We've made some pretty big mistakes in the past, but this is the chance, this is the generation to repair the damage. Pull the trigger up real carefully. See that? It's set now. Move back on. It's the changing times where the people need to go back to the bush and look after it, you know. Treating it like a wahi tapu or a sacred place. Yeah, it is sacred, but we need to go there and look after it so it stays sacred and special.
Nature provides us with some of our best memories, and yet we take that connection for granted, that connection we have to the earth. Deep down, I believe, in our DNA, we remember that connection to those lands and those places and those spaces and those animals, to those sounds of the environment. And deep down, I think our soul calls for it.
No calling yet.
So just keep that up, that's the flash. So, nothing.
Not that I can see, no.
Chick gone, definitely confirm the chick gone. Female still in there. I suppose the only thing we can do this season is hope she re-nests and keep an eye on it and keep the bait up, keep the traps done. Can't see that we can do anything else.
I guess I just love the idea of kea flying around our mountains. All those trips in the past we've done in the hills where the kea visited us and enriched our world in the hills and the mountains. Yeah, it's part of our being, really.
There is that possibility that despite everything we do, we may lose the kea in the next 10 years, but to our minds, it's no excuse for not trying. You know, if we've got the opportunity to try, then we're beholden to do so. And it may be, you know, we may lose, but we may win, and it's worth the gamble.
We can't afford to be any less ambitious than trying to be predator-free by 2050. It's one of the most important things that we will do together as New Zealanders.